The crumpled red ink notice lay on the table, a stark, final declaration. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that despite years of scraping by, of making sacrifices, of telling myself that things would get better, I was still losing. This was it, the last warning before everything went from bad to worse. My fingers traced the harsh lines of the print, the paper feeling thin and brittle, much like my hope had become. It was a debt collection notice, the kind that arrives when you've exhausted every other avenue, a symbol of defeat that burned like a brand. I had tried so hard for so long. Every extra hour at work, every skipped meal, every faded shirt worn one more year, it all felt pointless now. The red ink wasn't just a color, it was a wound, fresh and bleeding, on my already tattered financial life. Just last week, I'd sat across from the financial advisor, a man whose polished shoes and calm demeanor seemed to mock my struggle. He'd leaned back in his expensive chair, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, and delivered a line that cut deeper than any interest rate. "Some people," he'd said, his voice smooth and even, "are just meant to carry debt. It's a part of their financial landscape." The words hung in the air, casual and cruel, a dismissive wave of his hand over my years of effort. He wasn't talking about me, not really, but about a category of people, a demographic, and I was apparently firmly in it. His casual cruelty stung more than the final notice ever could. It wasn't just a statement. It was a judgment, a sentence passed without appeal. But something unexpected happened in that moment. Instead of the familiar wave of despair, the usual tightness in my chest, a quiet resolve began to harden within me. There were no tears, no shouts of frustration, just a cold, clear decision forming in the silence of my mind. His words, intended to demoralize and push me back into the accepted, defeated role, had instead ignited a fierce, almost primal determination. I wasn't meant to carry debt. I was meant to fight it, to break free from it, to prove him and his casual categories wrong. It was a quiet defiance, a silent vow that echoed through the empty spaces of my apartment. Sometimes, the most profound victories begin with the quietest defiance. The world expects a dramatic breakdown, a public display of anguish, but true change often starts in the stillness, in the moment when a person decides, with absolute certainty, that enough is enough. That silent resolve, born from the advisor's thoughtless words, felt like a spark in the darkness. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about a deeply personal conviction that my future would not be defined by someone else's narrow view of my potential. I picked up a pen then, not to sign the grim notice, not to accept its verdict, but to begin outlining something entirely new. The exact nature of this plan remained a mystery, even to me, a hazy but powerful vision of a different path. It wouldn't be the path of managing debt, but of obliterating it. This was not a surrender, it was a declaration of war, a personal revolution starting with a single pen stroke. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. My journey to that stark red notice hadn't started with a sudden crash, but with a slow, almost imperceptible slide. Beginning years ago with youthful optimism, I remembered feeling so excited about independence, about having my own money, even if it wasn't much. It was a gradual accumulation, a series of small, seemingly harmless choices that, over time, built into a suffocating weight. Life was a treadmill, and I was perpetually running just to stay in the same spot, watching the scenery of my financial goals blur past. The daily routine was a relentless loop. Each month began with a careful, almost surgical, allocation of funds. Groceries were a constant negotiation between necessity and desire. I'd stand in the supermarket aisle, calculator in hand, comparing unit prices, always opting for the store brand, never splurging on anything extra. My car, a faithful but worn-out sedan, always seemed to develop a new rattle or squeak just when I thought I had a few extra dollars saved. Repair costs were an unwelcome, recurring character in my financial drama. My apartment, situated in a quiet, unremarkable neighborhood, was modest but home. It was clean, functional, but it offered no escape from the feeling of being trapped, stuck in a financial rut that seemed to deepen with every passing year. Every paycheck felt like a temporary reprieve, quickly swallowed by bills and the ever-present shadow of debt. The first credit card had felt like an adult rite of passage, a tool for emergencies, for building credit. But those emergencies came more often than expected, and soon it became a crutch for everyday expenses, a way to bridge the gap between what I earned and what I needed. A new tire here, A utility bill there, a slightly nicer meal to escape the monotony. Each swipe added to the growing balance. Then came the side hustle, a hopeful venture into freelance writing, meant to provide extra income. Instead, it demanded an upfront investment in software and courses, leading to more debt rather than the promised financial freedom when clients didn't materialize as quickly as I'd hoped. Just as I started to recover, an unexpected medical bill for an emergency room visit wiped out my small savings buffer completely, sending me right back to square one, or perhaps even further behind. Friends, with their well-meaning invitations, also added pressure. "It's just one night out," they'd say, not understanding that just one night meant another week of ramen or another charge on the credit card. I wanted to be part of their lives, to maintain a semblance of normalcy, so I'd often overspend on social outings, then silently regret it for days afterward. The persistent feeling of never having enough, despite working hard, was a constant companion, and the advice from well-meaning relatives, "Just spend less," felt like a slap in the face. If it were that simple, I would have done it years ago. They didn't see the careful calculations, the constant sacrifices, the invisible struggle. All of this created deep emotional cracks. There was the gnawing anxiety that twisted my stomach before I checked my bank balance. The dread of seeing another overdraft fee or a balance that barely covered the next few days. Conversations with my partner about finances became strained, often ending in quiet resentment, unspoken accusations hanging in the air. The shame of declining invitations, making up excuses, or simply disappearing from social circles due to lack of funds was a heavy burden. It led to a slow erosion of self-worth, a feeling of being a failure despite my best efforts. I worked hard, I tried, but the mountain of debt seemed to grow taller with every step. There was a constant internal battle between wanting to improve my situation and feeling completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the problem. It was a realization that previous financial advice had always been about managing debt, about making it tolerable, not truly eliminating it. It was about living with the problem, not solving it. That silent resolve, born from the advisor's thoughtless words, finally transformed into action. I decided to completely reevaluate everything I thought I knew about debt and wealth. The old debt management strategies, the ones that kept me treading water, were out. I rejected them entirely. My plan now involved deep research into financial independence principles and, frankly, some pretty unconventional approaches. It was a complete paradigm shift. I stumbled upon an online community, a group of people who talked about money in a way I'd never heard before. They reframed debt not as a permanent state, but as a solvable puzzle, a challenge that required a different kind of thinking. This wasn't about cutting coupons, it was about understanding the system and then playing it differently. It was about challenging every ingrained belief I had about money, consumerism, and the societal expectations that had contributed to my debt in the first place. I had to unlearn years of conditioning. The first step was a radical budget. Truly radical. I cut out every single non-essential expense. This wasn't a punishment, it was a strategic move, a temporary measure to free up as much money as possible. My grocery bill shrank dramatically. Entertainment became free activities, long walks, library books, potlucks with friends who understood my new mission. My partner, initially skeptical, saw my unwavering determination and joined me. We cooked every meal at home, brewed our own coffee, and found creative ways to enjoy life without spending money. It was tough, sometimes lonely, but every dollar saved felt like a tiny victory. Next, I focused on income generation. I started selling things I no longer needed, old electronics, books, clothes, on online marketplaces. It wasn't much, but every was $20 that could go towards a debt. I took on freelance writing gigs again, but this time with a clear strategy and a much lower overhead. I wasn't looking for a career change, just extra cash. My evenings and weekends, once spent unwinding, were now dedicated to earning or saving. It felt like I was working 2 full-time jobs, but the motivation was different now. It wasn't about keeping my head above water, it was about actively pulling myself out. Confronting my beliefs about money was perhaps the hardest part. I realized how much I'd been influenced by advertising, by the need to keep up with friends, by the idea that certain purchases meant success. I started questioning everything. Did I really need that new gadget? Or was it just clever marketing playing on my insecurities? This mental shift was empowering. I began to see my spending not as a reaction to external pressures, but as a conscious choice. Then came the small victories. The first credit card, the one that started it all, was paid off. Seeing that zero balance was an incredible feeling. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was proof that the plan was working. That initial success fueled my motivation and built my confidence. I started applying the snowball method, focusing on paying off the smallest debt first, then rolling that payment into the next smallest. The momentum grew, and soon, the payments felt less like a burden and more like a powerful tool. Eventually, the day came. The final debt. It was a student loan that had felt like an immovable mountain. I made the last payment, and a few weeks later, a confirmation email arrived. Paid in full. I didn't frame it or cry over it. I simply printed it out and, with a quiet sense of satisfaction, discarded the old, red ink collection notice that had sparked this entire journey. It was replaced by a tangible symbol of freedom. The financial advisor's dismissive words were now an irrelevant echo. I wasn't suddenly rich, but I was free. The weight was lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace and control. I had not only gotten rid of my debt, but had developed a robust financial system and a completely new perspective on money. The simple joys of financial independence were profound. The ability to save without anxiety, to plan for a future that wasn't dictated by past mistakes, and to live without the constant gnawing worry. It wasn't about luxury, it was about security and choice. Debt isn't a life sentence. It's a solvable problem if you're willing to rewrite the rules.